Hi guys, thanks for joining me on my YouTube channel. Let me know please if you see me well, if you hear me well, type something in the chat box and I will read it. So I hope the connection is good and we can talk because it's so windy today here in Washington DC. I'm listening to it right now because my window is right here and I'm listening to that wind all day long. And it was even difficult to record my daily podcast because I record podcasts, news podcasts in Russian every day about Ukraine. So and my place where I record it, it's right here, so it's close to the window, and the wind was so strong, so it was difficult even to record. So let me know if everything is okay now. I don't see any messages. I just hope that you hear me and you see me. Please let me know if I can start. So let's start. Today we're going to talk about the Oscar ceremony and about the reactions in Russia and in Ukraine, and we'll discuss what it all means. I will try to explain it as much as I can. First, I will tell you briefly what is our program for today, because I like structure very much. I'm a very structured person. I give lectures, so I usually give my listeners, my audience, some table of contents, if you will. So I will start with the reactions in Russia. Russian state media and Russian politicians. I will talk a little bit about that. Then I will talk about the reaction of different groups of Russian people, of Russian society, those who are anti-war, of course. And that is the most interesting thing. As I think. So we will talk about it. After that, I will talk about Ukraine and the Ukrainian society and their perception of what happened. And finally, we'll talk about what does it mean in terms of war, what are the possible positive outcomes of that story, and what are the negative ones. So this is my table of contents. And now you know if you want to listen to the end or not. But first of all, before I start talking about Oscar ceremony and about Navalny and about the reactions in Russia and Ukraine, I just wanted to share with you guys that you see this T-shirt I'm wearing. This is in Ukrainian. It says "Не притулятися," which means don't lean, do not lean. When you are on the metro, traveling by metro, you can see the sign on the doors, do not lean on the doors. So this is do not lean. It means do not lean. And I bought this T-shirt yesterday at the concert of one of the most famous contemporary poets, Ukrainian poets, Serhiy Zhadan. He is in Washington, D.C. now, and he gave a concert yesterday. There were a lot of people. I met a lot of friends there. And you probably know I love poetry, and I write poetry. I write poetry in Russian and Ukrainian and in English. Most of all in Russian, but recently I started writing more in Ukrainian. And in English, I have maybe only 3 or 4 poems because it's still a little bit difficult for me to write in English, but I try. And my husband writes poetry as well. So we have an Instagram page, but it's another topic. So I just wanted to share with you guys. If you haven't heard about Serhiy Zhadan, a Ukrainian poet, I highly, and if you like poetry, of course. If you don't listen. If you like poetry, please Google Serhiy Zhadan. I will type it later in the description and in the chat box. Oh, I'm sorry, something in my eye. So Google it, please, and you will enjoy it. He's one of my favorite poets, and I don't know any Ukrainian person who doesn't love him. Everybody likes him. He's a very, very, very good poet, and he writes not only poet. He's a writer, and I like his books as well. But his poetry is fascinating. And he writes about war. And he wrote about war 8 years ago when the war in Donbass started in Ukraine. And his poetry is very deep about love, about war, about life, just different things about Ukraine. So before we start talking about Oscar and all those discussions and how people fought with each other, and I will tell you a story about very useful Russian and Ukrainian word about that. So let me read one poem written by Sergei Zhadan to see if you like it. If you like it, you can find it in English. It will be in English, of course. That is one of the poems he read yesterday at the concert. And the poem is called She's 15, Sells Flowers at the Train Station. She's 15, sells flowers at the train station. Sun and berries sweeten the oxygen beyond the mines. Trains stop for a moment, move further on. Soldiers go to the east, soldiers go to the west. Nobody stays in her city. Nobody wants to take her with them. She thinks, standing in the morning at her spot, even this territory, it turns out, may be desirable, dear. It turns out you don't want to leave it for a long time. In fact, you want to hold on it for dear life. It turns out this old train station and an empty summer panorama are enough for love. Nobody gives her a good reason for this. Nobody brings flowers to her older brother's grave. In a dream, you hear that motherland forms in darkness, like the spine of a teenager living in a boarding house. Light and darkness are formed, take shape together. Summer sun flows into winter. Everything that happens today to everyone is called time. The main thing is understanding that all this happens to them. Her memories being formed, consolation formed. Everyone she knows was born in this city. At night, she recalls everyone who left this place. When there is no one left to remember, she falls asleep. This was a poem written by Sergei Zhadan. Of course, he read it yesterday in Ukrainian, and it has rhymes. Here, you heard that in the English translation, it doesn't have rhymes, but it's still very beautiful. And it's about one uh, eastern city of Ukraine. And that, as far as I remember, he told a story about this poem yesterday. It was written when the war in Donbass started, not now, not recently. Okay, I see your messages. Thank you so much. Russian bots are mad about Navalny winning an Oscar. Uh, Not only Russian bots, I will talk about it. Yes, привет, hi from Sweden. Hi from Canada. Hi from Canada. Hello from Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. And tell me something about yourself, your life. I want to know about my audience more. And how do you feel about the clock change? If it changed, I think it's only in US for now. So I don't feel good about it. It's very hard to wake up. So about Oscar, because our topic today is Oscar. Sergei Zhadan, by the way, talked to the audience yesterday, and he didn't say anything about the Oscar ceremony. And there was like Q&A section, and people didn't ask his opinion. People were not interested about Oscar at all. So let's start talking about what happened. As I said before, I will start with the Russia's reactions. You mentioned already that Russian bots were angry. But I think, first of all, Russian politicians were angry. We don't have any proofs that they were really angry, but we have some signs, and those signs are really uh, like funny and absurd as many things in Russia now. I recorded a small video today, a short video, where I told you a very famous old Soviet anecdote, and I will tell you this anecdote again. So one person is asking another one, where do you get world news from? Well, you know, because of the censorship. So where do you get the news from? And the second person replies, from the refutation of TASS agency. TASS was the main Soviet news agency. So when TASS denies something, that's how people know what happened. And that's exactly what happened with Navalny. I was monitoring Russian websites and Russian state media, TV channels, and the main newspapers the next morning, the next day after the Oscar ceremony. And what I have found that, for example, on the main one of the main news agency in Russia, RIA Novosti, it's one of the main propagandist resources. There was a news called Yakut. Yakut means from Yakutia, the Russian region. Yakut film directors didn't get Oscar for their documentary, and people made fun or made fun of it a lot because that's exactly like in that anecdote. They are talking about someone who didn't get Oscar because they don't want to mention Navalny. And Putin never mentions Navalny, never calls him by his name. I also recorded a video about that. They have the whole vocabulary, the whole dictionary of synonyms for Navalny, Berlin patient, and so on, famous blogger. But they never pronounce his last name and his first and last name. So they never call him by his name. And that's what happened with Oscar as well. How would you tell the news about it if you can't mention Navalny? And there is another Russian, not Russian, Soviet anecdote, which I like very much. So, it's an old one as well. Reagan and Brezhnev are having a running contest. So they run. And the next day, the Soviet newspapers write that Leonid Ilyich Brezhnev was the second, and they're like proudly telling people about that. He was the second. He took the second place, and Ronald Reagan came the second to the last. So actually, Ronald Reagan was the first, obviously, but they can't say it straight, and they rephrase it in this Orwell way. So that's what happened. No Navalny, no Oscar for Navalny, no documentary about Navalny. After that, so it was in the morning news. The main TV channels in Russia, NTV, Russia One, first TV channel, Первый канал, they didn't mention it at all. And I was scrolling their websites, and I even used the search bar, and I didn't find anything. After maybe several hours, I found one news that Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, Putin spokesman, he said that he didn't see this movie, he didn't see the documentary, but for him, it's obvious that there is an element of politicization around Oscar, and that they give the fact that they give that gave Oscar to Navalny movie. This is an element of politicization. I could dedicate the whole lecture or the whole live stream to the language of Mr. Peskov, because it's very, very interesting. He is always very vague. One of his favorite phrases is, they don't know anything in Kremlin about this or that. And here, so the interesting thing was that there was no news about Navalny on the website of the certain TV channel, but then a news about Peskov appeared. But what is Peskov commenting on if there was no news about Navalny? This is an absolutely absurd absurdity, absolute absurdity. So that's how Russian media work now. So they didn't mention it. After that, the certain media here and there, and those ones who are, I don't know, who have more freedom, if we can say it in the circumstances in Russia now. Those like Kommersant and Vedomosti, some newspapers, they did say about Navalny. They did mention him and the documentary, but the majority of media, they didn't even notice it. They were talking about Yakut film directors who didn't get the prize for their documentary, and some of the resources, some I would say patriotic resources, they were talking about like how it might be a conspiracy plot against Russia, and the Western countries, they obviously are going to use Navalny as a weapon against Russia, and they're creating anti-Russia. They have this term they use a lot, almost every day now. So that was the whole discourse in Russia. If we talk about Russian state media, if we talk about Russian propaganda and Russian politicians, so Russian mainstream, how they talk about Navalny and that prize for Navalny documentary. So they actually didn't talk at all. They were trying to hide it. And the thing is that the more they want to erase Navalny, the more visible he is. And we see it. Each time they were trying not to notice him, he becomes more and more visible for the Western world, not inside Russia, unfortunately. He is in prison for a long time enough now, and of course, a lot of people, they, even those who were following the events, they start like forgetting it. It's fading, it's fading because they don't talk about it much. But for the Western world, Navalny becomes more and more visible. And I will talk about it at the end. Remember this point, because we will talk about advantages and disadvantages of that story, about the Oscar and documentary. So remember this, and I will come back to this. We have talked about Russian politicians and Russian media. Let me look at the chat before I go to the next point. Let me look. I'm from Glasgow. Thank you so much. Hi from DC. Do you hear the wind, Katrina, in in DC? It's so windy. This is crazy. I'm a paramedic and have a small farm. That's very nice. Registered nurse. That's so interesting to read about, you guys. I will read about it a little bit later. Peskov looks like Mr. Rooney from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Okay. Please do. What did you mean, Elizabeth? A lecture about Mr. Peskov? Do you think it's very interesting? I don't know. Love your T-shirt. Yes, I like it very much, and I like the fact that I bought it at Jadan's concert. Because again, I like this poet very much. So let's go to the next point. I told you guys in the beginning that I will talk about how anti-war Russians reacted to this event. And the reactions were different. That's why I said it was very interesting to read it, and sometimes it was very interesting, but sometimes it was very sad. Because a lot of good people were fighting with each other. And, there is a very good word in Russian and in Ukrainian language. It's the same word. They use it a lot in both languages, especially now. It's a short word, very rude, but people use it a lot to. So the main meaning of that word is a discussion. But it's not a discussion. It's not a nice discussion. It's when people are fighting with each other, predominantly on social media, and they call each other names, they ban each other on Facebook, and they say things that are not nice at all to each other and stuff like that. And in Russia and in Russian and in Ukrainian language, it's called srach. Srach literally means like shitstorm. So it's literally from that word, but it's very short. It has only 4 letters, And so that's why it's convenient to use it, and people use it all the time. And it even became a part of the words, like, you know, the word gate, like Watergate, and gate became the part of different scandals, like Panama Gate and Pizzagate and so on. So that part srach in Russian and in Ukrainian language became also like a gate, the part of the words. The only difference between gate and srach is that srach is usually not about politics. It can be about politics, but it's wider. It can be about how to grow the kids, or about if you should wear a mask like during pandemic or something like that. So it's about all aspects of our life, and people usually do it on social media, so it's not a very big political scandal like gate is. So srach, we can say that it was Navalny srach in Russian, on Russian and Ukrainian social media. It's a very useful word, but rude, remember, it's a rude word. And it replaces the discussion, but it's a rude version of discussion. So what I wanted to say about that, that's right, between anti-Russians, and that's why I said it was very sad to see that. Like, I saw my friends fighting with each other, and I'm trying not to be involved in that, because it's very emotionally difficult for me. And also, as a journalist, I need to stay more neutral, you know, so I'm trying not to be involved. But at the same time, it was interesting to read. So there are different groups of people. There was one group of people who were absolutely, they were so happy with the fact that Navalny got Oscar, and not only, I mean, Navalny documentary got Oscar, and not only with this fact, but with the fact that the whole world saw his family, saw Yulia Navalny and their kids, and they were on the stage, Oscar ceremony, the whole world is watching them, and they look nice. It's a beautiful family, and Navalny is not hiding his wife and his kids as Putin does. And so people were so happy, and a lot of my friends were writing on Facebook. They were following that Oscar ceremony. They were watching it, and they were writing, "Oh, I'm crying. I'm so happy. That's so good." And there was another group of people who were like, let's say, very skeptical about what happened, and they were even irritated, and they didn't understand why it happened, and they started criticizing, first of all, Oscar committee in general, because they didn't invite Zelensky to give a speech, because nobody actually talked about war, except that Canadian film director of the documentary Navalny. He was the only one who mentioned the war, not even Yulia Navalny. So people were angry about that. I'm talking now about Russian people. I will go to the Ukrainian society later. So now I'm talking about Russian people. So they were criticizing Yulia Navalny and Dasha Navalny, the daughter, for how they looked. Like, they looked very glamorous, wearing those dresses, and it was contrasting with what the pictures we get from Ukraine, like people dying, houses are being destroyed, and so on. And it's a glamorous picture that doesn't it doesn't fit that it's something from another world, you know. And they started criticizing so Yulia for her dress. So how come she like is grieving about her husband being in prison if she's wearing a nice dress? I do not agree with that, but because it's some people, it doesn't mean if they look nice, it doesn't mean they are not in depression, or they're not sad, like and have all kinds of negative emotions. So we can judge by actually by how people look, right? But some people were criticizing her for that. So, and they had a point. Because they were saying like good Russians are again in the center of the universe. Everybody is looking on those good Russians. Navalny is again in the center of the world's attention, and Ukraine is not in the center of the world attention as it should be, because the war is ongoing and Zelensky is not giving a speech. Ukrainian documentary didn't get anything. So people were not happy at all. And what happened? Those people who were not happy at all, they got angry at those people who were happy. And those people who were happy got angry at those people who were not happy. And the strike started. I'm laughing, but it's not, to be honest, it's not funny at all, because the situation we have now, it's painful, and it's stressful, and people react like this, unfortunately, very good people. So each of those groups, they have their points, but they couldn't understand each other and came to the, so, and it was very, one group, to the extent that everything is great, we're so happy, everything is great, we can't say anything about Navalny because he's in prison, we can't criticize him and his family at all. And another group was exactly the opposite. He was like, they were like, we can't be happy at all, we can only criticize them for this and that, and we can only talk about Ukraine and how people suffer there. So that's what happened, and the Russian anti-war society, that part of society, were divided, and it's very important point, I think. So that was my part about Russia, and if you have questions about Russia, let me check the chat box. Bad jokes are good. I love bad jokes. Sometimes they're good. Yes, sometimes they're good. Talk about absurdities. Oh, there is a lot of absurdity in Russia. Okay. If you have questions about Russia, please, and the reaction on that Oscar ceremony, please ask me and I will try to answer. So let's go now to the reaction in Ukraine, how they reacted in Ukraine. So the majority of people, you know that, I think, were disappointed and were angry. Navalny is not popular in Ukraine at all. A lot of people think that he's not better than Putin. There are obviously some dark pages in his past. He used to be like nationalist in a bad way, and he did the certain statements, but it was very long time ago. He made a controversial statement about Crimea, about how many 9 years ago, but recently he wrote his platform, the 15 principles of his platform, and he mentions that 100%, no question, Crimea is Ukrainian. Russia needs to go back to the borders of 1991 and give to Ukraine everything everything that was annexed, occupied, and so on. So he was pretty clear about that, and it was recently. But we will talk about it later. But however, we can't change anything about that, and Ukrainian people have all rights to have this attitude towards Navalny and towards other Russian politicians, and I don't blame them at all. So they don't like him, and of course, the fact that he got a prize and the Ukrainian documentary about the Ukrainian orphanage suffered from the war didn't get a prize. That fact made them very, very disappointed. By the way, I'm going to watch this. I have watched the documentary about Navalny a year ago when it was shown on the Sundance Film Festival, but I haven't had a chance to watch to watch that Ukrainian documentary, The House of Splinters, and I'm going to do it maybe today before going to bed or tomorrow. This is on my list. It's just it appeared several days ago, so I didn't have a chance to watch it. And they were also angry, Ukrainian people, because of the certain hypocrisy of the Oscar committee, as I said before, because they didn't let Zelensky to give his speech. They said it was not a political event. That's how they explained the refusal. But at the same time, we understand that the fact that they gave the prize to the Navalny documentary, it was a political decision. It was a political step, and let's be honest, Oscar ceremonies are not always without politics. They are very often about politics, and so that was a certain level of hypocrisy. And I will tell you later why that is one of the most negative outcomes of what happened. However, there was another part of the Ukrainian society. I talked with a lot of people, and I read what they wrote on Facebook, how they discussed that. And I talked to one of my colleagues, Ukrainian colleagues here in DC. And so some people, not the majority of people, but there is a certain part of the society, they think that it's not that bad for Ukraine. So they still don't like Navalny. They think that he's a chauvinist, imperialist, and stuff like that. But they think that the fact that he got this, the documentary got this prize, it might be at the end of the day, on a grand scale, it might be good for, rather good than bad for Ukraine. And also they say that I read a big article in Ukrainian yesterday. They were analyzing why that Ukrainian documentary was not that popular, and it's not very popular in Ukraine either, unfortunately, because they didn't put much effort in the promotion. And the Ukrainian journalists analyzed that, and they said, let's admit that we didn't put that much effort into promotion as they did, who created the Navalny documentary. You know, that Sundance Festival and other different festivals and CNN and different platforms where you could watch it and so on. So they put a lot of effort in promoting that documentary. And people in Ukraine, people admit that. Although that Ukrainian documentary, those who watched it, they say it's a very good one. But I will watch it, and I will tell you later about my impressions. So there is also like different part of the Ukrainian society, and at the end of the day, I would say that it's not very, very, very important. So they passed this Oscar ceremony, and they have they live in terms of war. They have shellings every day, so they don't have time to think about Navalny and Yulia's dress and whether it was good or bad and so on. They discussed it, but then they moved forward. So let's think now what was positive and what was negative about it. Let's sum up. So negative effects, in my opinion, if you will, negative effects. Russian propaganda used that to say that the world is losing interest in helping Ukraine. And I saw that discourse in Russian media, on Russian propagandist resources. That's how they explained that Zelensky was not allowed to give a speech. They say, you see, they're not interested in helping Ukraine anymore. It's not interesting anymore, and it's a very important point, because for Ukraine it's crucial that the world keeps this interest in helping Ukraine, because protecting Ukraine, by protecting Ukraine, the world is protecting itself. Other countries are protecting themselves, and that's how they represent it. For example, in Baltic countries, they say that we are not protecting only Ukraine, we are protecting ourselves. And the other countries, they in Ukraine, they think they should understand that they are protecting the whole architecture, peace architecture in the world by protecting Ukraine. So it's crucial to still have this interest. And Russian propaganda immediately used that moment when they didn't give Zelensky the possibility to talk. They immediately used that moment to say, world doesn't want to help Ukraine anymore. And by the way, I was thinking about it. They said that they didn't want to invite Zelensky because he's a politician and it's not a political contest. But at the same time, Zelensky is an actor. He's not only a politician, he's a very talented actor. And he can be a part of and he was some festivals and some events related to the cinema and movies and so on, because he is an actor. And that was the first negative point, and I think it's a very serious point. Also, one more negative point, nobody talked about Ukraine, including Yulia Navalny, and I have already mentioned that because only that Canadian film director mentioned Ukraine. Russia and so-called good Russians were in the center of attention. I have already mentioned that as well. And what are the positive outcomes of what happened? The world has found out by watching this movie. I will explain what I mean. The world has found out what kind of monster it's dealing with. You know, a year ago, I was watching this movie with my American husband, and so he's not as much into news about Navalny and about Russian opposition and Russian politics in general as I am, of course, because I'm a journalist with a Russian background. So when I was watching this documentary, I was thinking, well, it's a good documentary, but nothing new for me. I knew that before, and I was discussing it on air. I wrote articles about that, recorded podcasts, interviews, and so on. So I knew everything they were talking about and how it happened. In this documentary, they show, if you haven't seen it yet, they show how they investigated the poisoning of Navalny, and it's a real thriller. So you see how they call the killer and they talk to a killer in this movie. They show all the process, how they investigated that. It's very interesting and it's very gripping. So I watched my husband, who was watching that documentary, and he was literally glued to the screen, and it was very interesting for him, and he was shocked by what he saw, how like in middle age you can poison your opponent literally, and here is the killer, you can call him and you can talk to him. So he was absolutely shocked. And I think it's a very, very important point, and it's a very important effect that documentary has, and it's supposed to have on the audience, because the audience abroad, outside Russia, outside Ukraine, needs that shock, needs to see what Putin is, and what Putin is capable of, what he can do with people, and it's very important. So because a lot of people, they still don't understand that it's to that point. People don't understand how people in Russia live now, that they can arrest you for the anecdote. By the way, they arrested a person for the anecdote today. or yesterday, because we were reading those news today. So anecdote, blank paper, telling the dream about Zelensky. You know that story, that guy wrote, he posted a stories on Instagram that he saw a dream about Zelensky and he was arrested. So people live in that Orwell's world, and for some people it's not real. They think it's some stories, like maybe it's not true. And in this movie you see that it is true, and I think it's very important. So the more popular, the more exposed this movie is, the better. And the second positive outcome, that Navalny and his family is getting more and more visible. I actually don't know if it's positive or not. It's just what we have. It's a result. So Navalny and his family is getting more and more visible. He is represented, or even her, Yulia, is represented as an alternative leader. And it's very similar, if you think about it, to what happened to Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who became a Belarusian leader because her husband was in prison. And she became a leader instead of him. And now she's representing normal Belarus for the rest of the world. So Alexander Lukashenko is, we don't even call him a president, he's like a legal president. And Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is representing Belarusian people and normal Belarus, democratic Belarus. And so that is slowly happening, I think, to Navalny's family. And that is bad for Putin. And what is bad for Putin is good for Ukraine. So you see, there are things that can be read as good as and as bad, but we can discuss it. And I gave you all the information I have and different thoughts people have. And I told you about those discussions, right? That happened between different parts of the society. And so you can have your own opinion after that. I hope so. So please share your opinion. What do you think? Is it good or bad that Navalny, documentary about Navalny, got Oscar? And I will read your questions and your comments. So for you to decide if it was more positive or more negative event. Okay, let's bed. So I see. Greetings from Chicago. I love Chicago. Do you think Russia might have provided Iran with nuclear test data? And why do you think American society is so strangely nonchalant about the prospect of uncontrollable nuclear proliferation? So, it's difficult for me to answer the questions like that because I'm not a political analyst. I can talk about the society, I can talk about the language, I can talk about propaganda, media, and so on. And it's a little bit, it's out of my field a little bit. I think it's good to promote the opposition in Russia, thinks Elizabeth, and to take every opportunity to upset the Kremlin. What can be wrong with that? Every step towards freedom and justice is important. Thank you so much for your comment. Okay. Yes, I do interact with chat, but not every second. I think they're angry at the wrong people. Navalny spoke out against the war almost immediately. He's spoken out against Crimea. He's not perfect by a long shot, but what's the alternative? If not Putin, then who? They have this expression in Russia that there is no alternative. Well, there are a lot of good people in Russia, but a lot of good people are in prison, good politicians and activists. And I don't think Navalny is the only one who is an alternative to Putin. I'm sure in big Russia, we can find a lot of good people. But Navalny is one of the most famous opposition leader, and he is popular. he has his audience, especially young audience, and he knows how to work with the young audience, even being in prison, even still. So he is yes, what Russia has now. But I think if there was more freedom in Russia, they could find a lot of people who could compete with each other as in a real democracy. Okay, so what are your thoughts? Share with me about Oscar and about Navalny. What do you think? Is it good or bad? Or if you watched that movie documentary about Navalny, you can also share your impressions. Okay, I have read it already. Yes, bad jokes are good. I think sorry, it's past midnight in UK. Fingers are sleepy. Yes. Maxim Katz did a great video on the Navalny documentary. Can't recommend it highly enough. Thank you. Russian bots. Yes, I think I actually read everything. Thank you so much for watching me, and please don't hesitate to send me any comments or questions. And I like actually interacting with people. You said I'm sorry that I was not paying attention to the chat because I was talking, and I try to do it in between the like little topics in my speech. So I will I always try to reply when I see interesting messages. And it's actually a pleasure to read messages from you guys, because I also have a Russian YouTube channel. I don't record as much as I record for the English one. I started recently because I saw some videos gain some views, so I started doing it again. But it's not. It has little audience, but it has a lot of Russian bots, and they just they trash my comment that comment chat box, and it's impossible to read. So it's always a pleasure to read your comments under my videos, because your comments are always like intelligent and and clever and interesting. So thank you so much, and thanks for watching me. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and recommend your friends to watch my channel. And don't forget to look for Sergei Zhadan poetry if you like poetry, please. I'm Ksenia Turkova, and I hope to see you soon, guys. Bye.